Greetings, scholars. As I, David, your mind mechanic, I am here to help you think better and feel better so you can be better. Today, I wanted to discuss trauma and post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, there's all the varieties of trauma. If you feel like you've had some trauma, if you're not, talking to a therapist or you need some assistance, you should probably go do that. Some of you may be aversive to maybe getting treatment. And there's more than one way to kind of go about treating a post-traumatic stress and trauma. Now, one thing I wanted to specifically address today, and it's kind of an alternative thing. So, on the internet, when I'm talking to people, something that's come up recently is people are asking me a lot about what are alternative forms of treatment for all sorts of things. So, whether it's anxiety, whether it's depression, whether it's trauma. And so I want to specifically address trauma right now and post-traumatic stress. So let's start with just the traditional forms of treatment, and this isn't going to be an exhaustive list. So there's a handful of go-to treatments that a lot of therapists use. So there's a thing called EMDR. If you've heard of it, it's called eye movement desensitization restructuring. And basically what it is, the original version, or one of the original versions, you could, if you're watching this anyway, you tap on the shoulder, or they have this light bar, which is a lot of what they use now. They have this light bar, and you follow lights, and you talk about the thing, and it's supposed to kind of pull this stuff out of you. It has good numbers on it, good data on it, so it's something that we use. So there's that kind of therapy. There's your traditional talk therapy. There are people that believe that if you, do enough of the right stuff with diet and exercise, with meds, there's all sorts of things we can look at here. There's another one called somatic therapy, and it's, if you know anything about words, somatic therapy, it has to do with the body. So there is this idea, and there's some data, to suggest this, that the body, the organs even, your DNA possibly, that there's more than just what's in the brain that is holding on to the old trauma and those old hurts. And so somatic therapy or psychology, and it's something where basically the psychotherapy focuses on the somatic experience. So that's your bodily experience. And there's more than one way to go about doing this. A lot of times they do things like mirroring sound and touch and movement and breathing, a whole bunch of stuff. But I've got an interesting idea, and it's something I actually talk about with people. So I get a lot of inquiries for new patient inquiries, and the last few years I have just found myself, now part of this is personal experience, but a lot of it's professional experience and what I read in the data. So something I've been suggesting to people when it looks like they've got trauma, and just the feel I'm getting from them, this is just the pre-screening call, right? I will tell people, instead of wasting money, maybe not wasting, but instead of spending money on therapy, because it can be cost prohibitive for some people, even if you have insurance, but I've told quite a few people recently, I actually told a patient of mine, maybe you should stop. I'll just say it this way. I've said, maybe you should stop therapy and go learn Jiujitsu. Or I've said that to possible new patients. I'll say, instead of spending your money, and going to a therapist and talking about stuff that you don't want to talk about, and maybe it's weird for you to do the therapy thing, go learn Jiu-Jitsu. And you think, well, David, why would I go learn Jiu-Jitsu to get over my trauma? Well, I will tell you. And, first I'll give you an anecdote. So I have a therapist friend of mine. She is a yoga instructor. And she's even talked about, so she'll be doing just yoga with people, whether they're patients or not, and they'll start crying. there's this release of whatever it is. Again, there's stuff that's in the body, right? Now, the reason well, again, personal experience with jiu-jitsu, but the reason I'm very, very sold on the idea of like learning jiu-jitsu, and I don't just mean you go a little bit here or there. I mean actually getting into it and really learning it, getting good at it. There's a lot that has to happen for you to get good at jiu-jitsu. And there's a lot of stuff that you have to get good at, and part of how you get good at it is actually there's some healing that can happen with those old hurts, with those old traumas. So a lot of times people with trauma, their limbic system, their fight or flight responses have been rewired in a way that isn't good for them. It's not helpful. The fight or flight response is essential for humans, but it can get kind of, if you want to think of it as wiring, it can get kind of wired in a way that just isn't helpful. It isn't useful for them, right? And so if you get good at jiu-jitsu, there's a lot that has to happen for you to achieve that. Because there's this very primal thing, and everybody knows this. This isn't, you don't have to have all the degrees I have, and you don't have to like be a scientist. You don't even have to read anything to know this. There's a very primal thing of rolling around on the ground with another human where the implication is this person's going to kill me. Now, when we do jiu-jitsu, when we're rolling, as we say, when we do jiu-jitsu, we're not going to actually like kill somebody, and we're not looking to hurt anybody at all. But a lot of the moves are absolutely like that's entirely possible. And you think again, why? The next thing a lot of people say is, why would I want to put myself through that? And that's a great question. So here's what happens. Remember I said the wiring, right? We get our fight or flight mechanism, among other things, gets wired a little wonky. It's not helping us. It's kind of getting in the way of life. Well, imagine I told you that instead of therapy, traditional therapy that is, what if I told you went and did jiu-jitsu and you can rewire that part of your system to where it's in a better spot, it's in a better state. You're not as anxious all the time. You don't have that feeling of dread all the time. What if I told you that could happen? And you get in shape while you did it. Oh, and you learn how to defend yourself. Oh, and you would learn how to hold yourself better, talk better, look a little different. And by look, I don't mean necessarily being in shape look. I mean how you hold yourself, how you interact with people. What if I told you that was possible by doing this one thing? Would you do it? Would you spend the money? The same money. Literally the same money, possibly less, to be honest with you. But the same money. What if I told you you could just do jiu-jitsu and get good at it? I'm not saying it's absolutely a cure-all. What I am saying is there's more than one way to get better. And there's data on this. There's data on the physiological and psychological things, which is all the same to me anyway, but there's quite a bit of data to show what happens when you learn this skill. Because eventually, because one of the first things that happens to a lot of people, especially when they've had trauma, one of the first things that'll happen is they'll say, and I've been there with people, they say, I can't breathe. So you got this, your partner, your rolling partner's on top of you. Maybe in some ways they feel a little compromising. People will say, I'm freaking out, can't breathe. All the things. Understandable. Totally understandable. It's this very primal thing that we're engaging in. But think about this. You're submitting yourself to, and I know people don't like that word, but you're submitting yourself, when you're practicing, you're submitting yourself to this other human. So there's a level of trust. In most good jiu-jitsu gyms, the culture's really good, the vibe's really good. I take my son to this one here in town, and it's just fabulous. Everyone's so helpful. Everyone's supportive. Now my son doesn't have trauma. He's 10. But the vibe there, all the people there, the instructors, the other students, the parents, everyone's very supportive. But if he struggles, they're still very supportive. They don't beat him up over, verbally beat him up over if he screwed up or what. And nobody does that. It's a very supportive thing. If one of the other kids has an issue, everyone's very supportive. But again, when you're rolling around on the ground with someone, learning how, this martial art, you're learning how to, like the main thing is you're learning how to do jiujitsu. But again, it's more than that. And to get good at it, your body starts getting used to the thing. Like, you learn a lot, right? Things that some of it's hard to articulate, but like, you learn what it actually feels like to really be rolling around on the ground with someone in a not always friendly way. Your body will get accustomed to, especially like if you can get through that, I can't breathe. You're breathing just fine. But sometimes it doesn't feel like it. And it's a way to recondition you. It's a way to recondition you. And in studies on people there was a show called Fight Science. I don't know if it's still on, and I would swear it was Randy Couture, but don't hold me to that, scholars, because I'm being lazy and I don't want to look it up. But they were doing physiologic measures on these fighters, and I think it may have been him, but whoever they put all these sensors on, and they were doing all these readings, and they did blood work, and the doc or whoever was doing this remarked that it was interesting because a lot of the things that they thought were going to happen to this fighter during a fight, basically things that they thought would increase or decrease, whatever the case was, it was the exact opposite. So instead of an adrenaline response happening, the adrenaline response didn't happen at all. Now, adrenaline's important because when we had that fight or flight mechanism kick in, adrenaline kicks in. And having done martial arts for a long time myself, I can tell you this. That adrenaline response doesn't even last a minute. Not really. A lot of people say, oh yes, it lasts longer than that. It really doesn't. That initial adrenaline dump. Now, there's other endogenous neurotransmitters and hormones. That's a whole other conversation for another time. So those endorphins that you hear about, that's a related but different mechanism. We're just talking the pure, like, you freak out, fight or flight, adrenaline dump. 30 seconds tops. So a lot of people gas out. So if they do a lot during that adrenaline dump, they'll gas out. They don't have energy. And again, you think, what's that have to do with trauma? What's that have to do with my anxiety? Well, imagine, again, you're training jiu-jitsu and your body finally starts to rewire itself. It finally gets to get accustomed to this stuff. What we're doing is we're lowering things, right? What happens is the body stops doing that adrenaline dump in a crisis moment. It's one of the things that happens in just most martial arts. This is even true in like all your professional sports players, I believe. I believe there's some data on this as well, have a similar mechanism. There's a calm that's there. A lot of people think, well, there shouldn't be a calm, right? There shouldn't be a calm state when you're fighting, literally fighting. Well, why can't there be? It's like a lot of your high-end combat vets, your Navy SEALs, all your special operators, they have a lot of that too. Takes a bit for them to get worked up. And also, because of the very physically intimate nature, we're not talking about sex, we're just talking about rolling on the ground with each other. Because of the physically intimate nature, you got to face some demons there. Again, goes back to that safety piece. So, again, if you got PTSD, you got trauma, you're thinking about treatment, maybe you're not sold on the idea of therapy. That's cool. I'm a therapist and I'm cool with that. I'm telling you, I've told quite a few people. I really have. Maybe you shouldn't come see me. Maybe you should go learn jiu-jitsu. It could help. So, love to hear all your thoughts on this. If you're watching this on YouTube, listen to it on Spotify. But love to hear your thoughts on this. But give it a try. Or look into it. And if you've made it all the way to the end of this, I want to say this. My whole commentary here is not, don't go to therapy, do jiu-jitsu. That's not, the principle here is, I don't want you all to feel like that psychotherapy or a particular treatment model that therapist is using, I don't want you to feel like that's the only way to be better. Because it isn't. I've got all the degrees in the world, been doing this a long time, and it's not. You could happen onto something this afternoon doing a Google search that would blow your mind and help you tremendously, and it might be something that a lot of people think is weird or hokey or snake oil, but it could help. So again, I want you all to just think about, don't think about everything in the traditional way. Think outside of the box. Because when it comes to being better, you have to be your own advocate. If something works, great. If it doesn't, don't do it. And that's whether you're seeing me or anybody else for that matter. So, those are my thoughts for this particular episode. I hope that helps. You know where to find all the links. Hit me in the socials. And we'll see you next time.